Hello everybody, this is Alexey Kovязин, President of Firebird Foundation, and today I would like to discuss very important parameter of Firebird configuration, TempCacheLimit. This parameter is often overlooked and not well configured or configured in the wrong way. So let's dig inside this parameter and see how to configure it properly for various versions of Firebird. First of all, let's describe what TempCacheLimit is used for. In general, when you are doing the query with order by or group by or distinct or union, it is possible that Firebird will require to sort record set to deliver results. So this is the main and well-known definition for what TempCacheLimit is required, how it is used. However, Firebird uses the memory allocated, defined by TempCacheLimit, also for the other things like temporary blobs. If blob is less than a page size, it will be stored in the TempCacheLimit if there are enough space. Undo logs. So if you are doing some update or delete or any change data operation, the Firebird will try to keep all changes in memory in undo log, and this undo log also will be kept in TempCacheLimit. Monitoring data, when you are doing request to select from mono attachments, for example, the data will be prepared, will be handled also inside TempCacheLimit, and batch data. It's data for batch API. Now I would like to discuss in details how TempCacheLimit is allocated and used and managed in versions 2.5, 3.0, 4.0 and 5.0. It is necessary to understand how TempCacheLimit was changed, how approach to use TempCacheLimit was changed during these versions, because there were a lot of changes, and often people are being confused by these changes and configure TempCacheLimit in, for example, in Firebird 4 in the incorrect way. So let's start with TempCacheLimit in 2.5. As you remember from the first episode of configuration videos, Firebird 2.5 has three main architectures: Classic, Super Classic and Super Server. TempCacheLimit in Classic, which runs the separate process for each connection, is also tied to the process. So when the user establishes the connection, it means that every connection will have own TempCacheLimit. This configuration, when every connection has own TempCacheLimit, is really simple. So you can allocate, for example, 64 megabytes of TempCacheLimit to sort queries, and these 64 megabytes will be used in peak, so because TempCacheLimit is allocated on demand, to sort. However, it is not really a good situation, because it is possible that for the regular operations, for the usual operations, there is no need to use big TempCacheLimit to sort queries. However, for the reports or some seldom rare operations, it is really necessary to use much bigger TempCacheLimit to sort bigger record set. And in this case, it is beneficial to use Super Classic, for example. Super Classic has TempCacheLimit allocated per process. Well, in fact, you can notice that all temp cache limit is allocated per process in 2.5. So in Classic, it is per process, but it's for each process, and there are many FB and net server processes for Classic architecture. And for Super Classic and Super Server, also it is per process. So it's like just how to remember how the TCL is allocated. So idea is really good, but you have a big temp cache limit which is shared across all connections. And if some connections will require a big record set to be sorted, it can use this bigger temp cache limit and sort everything in memory. However, there is a big pitfall in 2.5 with this temp cache limit. Due to the legacy reasons, the temp cache limit in 2.5 is limited to 2 gigabytes. So you cannot allocate more than 2 gigabytes and use it. Moreover, there is a silent thing. So potentially you can edit your Firebird Conf in 2.5 and put, for example, 3 gigabyte. But in this case, the actual memory allocated for the temp cache limit will be not 3 gigabytes, but it will be 1 gigabyte. So it will be like 2 gigabyte to jump to the limit and 1 gigabyte to start over from the beginning. And if you will set, for example, 4 gigabytes, Firebird configuration will not give you any error, but actually the size of temp cache limit will be 0. So please be careful with setting the temp cache limit in 2.5. In general, for Super Classic and Super Server, their recommendation for 90% of all installations is to use maximum like 2 gigabytes. And it is the best configuration for 2.5. And I would like to remind you that 2.5 is now 14 years old and it is discontinued by Firebird project. The main reason why I am discussing because 2.5 is still widely used and not all companies, not all developers already started the migration. But of course, they should start and they should know the difference between the configurations in 2.5 and newer versions. Okay, great. Now let's see how the temp cache limit is allocated and managed and 3.0. In general, 3.0 was just a fix of the 2 gigabyte limit for 2.5. So if you could look at 2.5 and 3.0, the idea of allocating the temp cache limit is the same. So we are allocating the space, the area in memory for making to sort record set and so on per process. In case of Classic, when we have many processes, the temp cache limit will be also multiplied in terms of allocated per each process. In Super Server and Super Classic, temp cache limit is also allocated per process, so it will be shared for all connections. The good thing in Firebird 3 that now temp cache limit does not have the limit of 2 gigabytes and could be practically really big. Practically we have set it up to 64 gigabytes to serve really large report servers and so on. So this picture is really simple and really nice. You easily can understand what is temp cache limit when you are configuring in Firebird Conf and how it is applied to the specified architecture. So I like this simplicity in Firebird 3, but in Firebird 4 the situation changed. Firebird 4 has introduced the new approach for the configuration of many databases parameters, including TempCacheLimit. Now TempCacheLimit can be configured per database, and it will be allocated per database. Practically, it means the following. The value defined in Firebird Conf, TempCacheLimit, will be applied as a default value for all databases which will be connected, which will be used on this server. And in databases conf, it is possible to define, as usual, an alias for the database and specify the TempCacheLimit specifically for each database. How it is working for architectures of Firebird? For classic architecture, the situation is really simple. As you can see, it works almost in the same way that it was in 2.5 and when it was in version 3. The difference that now each connection will get the size of TempCacheLimit, which is specified for its database. For example, if the database does not have alias in databases conf and it does not have any value for TempCacheLimit inside databases conf, the classic connection for such database will use the default TempCacheLimit value. But if connection was established to the database which has specific, for example, increased TempCacheLimit, the size of TempCacheLimit will be used accordingly. And at this picture you can see that connection for database 1 will use like TempCacheLimit, let's say 100 gigabytes, and connection for database 2 will get the value from the databases conf, assuming it has it, and we'll use the associated TempCacheLimit value, which in this example it looks like bigger. So really good, granular and clear allocation of memory with possibility, for example, for tune. It is really important when you have a lot of databases on the same server, like a scenario of software as a service. You can give some kind of priority for the databases which require a lot of sortings and so on. For super server architecture, situation is also pretty clear. It works exactly, not exactly, very similar to how it was in Firebird 3. Now you can see that each database will have own TempCacheLimit. In Firebird 3, there was a TempCacheLimit per process, and regardless of the number of databases, 1 database or 10 databases, the allocated TempCacheLimit could be only as it was defined in Firebird Conf and Firebird 3. In Firebird 4, even if the configuration is the same, so we have like standard TempCacheLimit in Firebird Conf, the actual allocation of memory will be per database, and it means if there will be, for example, 2 databases connected, the amount of memory which Firebird will try to allocate, in case of necessity to perform big sorting, will be like doubled, because there are 2 databases and the TempCacheLimit now allocated is for each database separately. Also, as you can see on the picture, we can use databases conf to specify temp cache limit for each databases. For example, if we are aware that some database is heavily loaded with reports and they really need big temp cache limit. So we can allocate big temp cache limit for this database 2 in this example, and use smaller temp cache limit for database 1. But so it's, you know, both architectures, classic and super server, became a bit different as it was in Firebird 3, but still are in the same direction of how the temp cache limit is managed. However, the big difference occurred with super classic, and occasionally it was a mistake which was overlooked by the community, but finally was found and fixed. So in Firebird versions 4.0.0 until 4.0.4, the temp cache limit for super classic was allocated in the same manner like for classic. You see, there is classic, one temp cache limit for each connection. And for super classic in Firebird 4, it turned to be exactly like in classic. And of course, it is a really big difference comparing with Firebird 3 and Firebird 2.5. However, it was noticed and fix was applied. Here you can see the appropriate issues on GitHub with the discussion of the initial change and the fix. Fix was applied, and now for version 4.0.5 and up, the temp cache limit for super classic is allocated per database and shared per all connection, like it is in super server in version 4, like it should be from the beginning. And finally, the good news. In 5.0, the situation is exactly like in 4.0.5. No changes, and you can keep the unit configurations for Firebird 5 as they are in Firebird 4.0.5. Now let's discuss the practical approach for configuration of temp cache limit. Please note that all recommendations are done for 64-bit Firebird architectures. Well, there are not so many people who use 32-bit Firebirds, but if you are still using 32-bit Firebird, the recommendations will be different. So let's go for 64-bit. For 2.5, recommendations are really simple. For super server and super classic, the good idea is always use 2 gigabytes, the maximum available size of temp cache limit, and if we have maximum 2 gigabyte, let's use 2 gigabyte. For majority of servers, 2 gigabyte is not so big amount to worry about, but also it can really improve the performance of some queries. If you are using 2.5 classic, of course, the space to change temp cache limit is limited. And for example, if you will decide, okay, I will set up 1 gigabyte per classic per each connection. And we know that temp cache limit is allocated on demand. So potentially, if there will be no queries which will use all 1 gigabyte, and will be like, one connection or two connection, three connection with such query who really requires a big sort, it will be just fine. However, if at some moment the normal frequent query, which is running in all connections, will start to use this amount of memory, the memory quickly will be consumed, and it is easy to hit out of memory problem in this situation. As a workaround, it is possible to use multi-instance configurations. As you probably know, the classic and super classic can share access to the same database. So it is possible to run instance of classic for port 3050 and instance of super classic for instance for port 3051, for example, and configure both to access the same database. And because of the nature of classic and super classic, due to synchronization of log table level, both instances will have safe synchronized access to the database. And we can use this configuration to run reports which require big sortings on super classic and run other things on classic, or vice versa. It's all depends on the preference and and the profile of the system. Of course, it's a subject of more deep optimization, but this is pretty frequent thing, frequent workaround for this problem with too big TempCache limit or too small TempCache limit for 2.5. But not only for 2.5 actually, but for all classic architectures. For version 3.0, the general recommendation is to use like 10 or 15% of RAM for super server and super classic, and use the same approach of calculations for classic. So also, pretty simple to calculate how it will work. For 4.0.5 and 5, the recommendation a bit different. You remember that the TempCache limit is allocated per database, and if you have several databases running in super server or super classic mode, they can easily allocate the TempCache limit, the big TempCache limit for each database, and also could be out of memory problem. So it should be really careful while calculating the sizes for situation with multiple databases on the same server for 4.0 and 5.0 for super server and super classic architectures. Classic is classic. You can use the same approach as for 2.5 and 3.0 to configure it, and it will work in more or less the same manner. As always, the good point to start configuration is a configuration calculator for Firebird with this link, which will create the good initial, a bit conservative, but better than the standard configuration for your Firebird database. Thank you very much for listening and viewing. So the presentation from this video will be accessible in the link below. Also, where is the link to the first episode of the devoted to the configuration of Firebird. And in the next episode, we will go deeper with some other interesting parameters. So stay tuned. Please subscribe to official Firebird emails on the Firebird SQL website to receive notifications about new videos and all news from Firebird. Thank you.